Hey folks, let me go ahead and record this before I go out for a little bit. So I've alluded to y'all about Bo in the fifth column and how ultimately he is still a bootlicker. He doesn't like to use the A word because he's afraid of it, and he wants to maintain some sort of legitimacy. He has a lot of hashtag resistance boomers and everything else that follow him and comment on his channel. These patriotic boomers who are like, oh, well, Trump's going to, Trump is a dictator, this and that, rah, rah, rah. I mean, ultimately, who cares? Every president is going to be a dictator to some point. If you think that Biden is going to be any less of one, you're an idiot. I'm just going to tell you. But let's go ahead and just jump right into this, man. Let's not even waste any time with this nonsense. Let's go ahead and just get into it. And there we go. Got it. Okay, let's do it. Let's hear what this fool has to say. And you know what? Automatically, 9 minutes and 24 seconds. Hold on. Sorry about that. Oh, Lordy. Man, it's going to take a minute. I'm sorry. I know. There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and speed this up. I don't want to be here all day. There we go.
We're talking about the generals, what they said, what they did, because in a very, very short window of time, a whole bunch of stars, a constellation, have issued statements. And
once again, why do we care about what generals have to say? The generals didn't do that much even after My Lai. They got Lieutenant Calley and they found those other guys and they prosecuted them. Okay. Did the killing continue? You bet. In Vietnam. Yeah. It continued to happen. It's the same thing with, Abu Ghraib and all this other stuff. The stuff still happened. And the fact that what moral groundwork, and I've said this in the tweet, but I'll say this out loud as well. What moral groundwork, what sort of moral standing do any of these generals or this sergeant major have with talking about, well, we have a racism problem in the military, or, we have racial integration problem? They have no moral standing to do that. That's the pot calling the kettle black, literally.
people are familiar with Mattis and Mullen, so we'll skip over those. If you're not, look them up. They're worth reading. There were some others that came out as well. The Joint Chiefs pretty much all made statements, and they all included the word listen. And we're going to get to one that's important here in a minute. And then General Thomas said something that I think is noteworthy. General Thomas is not well known.
I don't care about what General Thomas has to say.
However, there are generals that are well known. There are generals that are liked. There are generals that are loved. There are generals that are respected. And
generals that are liked and loved. You think that there aren't enough? You think that just because a general is well loved, you think that the troops aren't secretly just like, fuck this guy. This guy makes this much more money than me and has the capability to go into whatever job he wants to after he gets out of the military. You think that's the case with a sergeant first class? Not necessarily. No. You think that a sergeant first class who, let's say, is in supply, you think that he's going to have the same opportunities that a command sergeant major will have? No, absolutely not. And that's something on a deeper level. I'm sure people are going to say, well, that you're comparing apples to oranges here. But still, why is it that we want to bootlick for the military and say, well, let's talk about generals, and what the generals have said? Oh, my gosh, And then, of course, you talk about, well, you know what? Go ahead and let him talk.
That you don't want angry at you. I would put General Thomas in that category. General Thomas was commander of SOCOM. If you're not a gamer or you're not familiar with the military, Special Operations Command. In your favorite action movie, in the backstory of the lead character.
Well, if he was the leader of SOCOM, he should answer for what happened with those Navy SEALs then, shouldn't he? Or that same Navy SEAL who decided to, just go on a rampage and start, shooting rockets into, civilians' homes and everything else. He should be responsible for that. You would be talking about that, but no, you didn't, did you?
Character, they go through his resume and they're like, he was a SEAL, he was Delta. All of these units are part of SOCOM. He commanded all of SOCOM. He's not somebody I want mad at me. I don't think he coordinated his statements with anybody else. I think he saw something that upset him and he responded immediately.
If you think that a general is just gonna, it's just okay. Go ahead, dummy.
Exception to the fact that the United States was referred to as a battle space. He thought that was the wrong term to use, and he is 100% correct. And that has come up a few times. A lot of people ask, why haven't the brass spoken out sooner? There's a concept, and it's really important. I've done a video on it in the past about civilian control of the military. The idea is that the U.S. military is apolitical. It serves the commander-in-chief, period, full stop.
That's, yeah, you can say that all day, but the military is generally seen as a right-wing organization, period, full stop. You know, just because you can have the veneer of a civilian-controlled unit is, you know, a civilian-controlled military is ridiculous. Yeah, Secretary of the Army, a lot of the time, you have, you know, folks that were in the United States military, you know, that were in the United States Army, being the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Navy, or whatever the case may be. You know, and ultimately, those secretaries ultimately are just bureaucrats who are basically don't want to get involved. And for the most part, they say to the Army or they say to the Navy or whatever the case may be, hey, you take care of your own house. So this idea, once again, that, you know, civilian control, it's like a civilian review board for cops. You know, they bring them out when it gets really bad. For the most part, though, they tell them, hey, keep your own house straight unless we have to get involved. That's the truth. Let's be honest.
It does not interject into domestic politics. That's why we haven't become a dictatorship. Most of these men feel ethically bound not to say anything. They feel that that is the best way they can serve the country because we're a republic, we're a democracy, and therefore they keep their opinions to themselves. The fact that you have had so many come out in such a short window of time to say something that is political or could be taken in a political way is very telling. It's something that we should pay attention to because the desire to preserve their service or the country is more important than a very long tradition.
Yeah, you know how long it took for the German army to actually revolt against Hitler? You know, in a real significant way, and how long before they actually did something? It took them until 1944 before they actually did something. Now, of course, the rumblings were there, but a lot of these folks were, you know, taken out and everything else. You know, it took, you know, good old Klaus von Stauffenberg, you know, in 1944 at Ratzenberg to finally, you know, set off that bomb. And even then, you know, that you know, it ignored, of course, the fact that there were loyal National Socialists such as what is his name from the Grossdeutschland division? I can't think of it. I'm not going to bother to look it up. But anyway, you know, they're trying to get Operation Valkyrie in control and, you know, to retake Germany so that, you know, but by that point, 1944, it wouldn't have made a difference. You know, unconditional surrender was the term that the Allies were going to use. So it wouldn't have made a difference. These are just people that are scapegoating. That's how I see the military today. They're just scapegoating. They don't want to be responsible. And these are the same folks who, you know, just, okay. I've said my piece. Go ahead.
Of keeping their mouth shut. It's something we should really pay attention to. Now, the far right can write a lot of these journals off because there is the idea that
yeah. Once again, let's hear this.
Once you hit 05, well, you're really just a politician. Okay,
yeah. I am past 05, which Lieutenant Colonel. Beyond that, yeah, you are a politician, and that you learn to, you know, do some egg sucking at a major level. You know, all those war colleges that you go to and everything else, you learn to play the game. You know, you don't get to those positions just on a whim. This is why, you know, generals like Curtis LeMay ran for vice president with George Wallace after he left the United States Air Force. These folks have learned enough and have been and who have at least seen the tippity top, the muckety muck, the people that are on top of the heap of society. And they have seen those issues. So, of course, they're going to know what goes on. And I think it's, once again, let's hear his response to that.
I don't believe that's true with a lot of these people. However, it's a pretty common concept. There's somebody else who may...
Yeah. Once again, you don't believe it's true. Why don't you believe it's true? You know, once again, do you think that somehow that a private first class is going to have the same type of view of things as a 4-star general? No, of course not.
Made a statement, a couple actually, that can't be written off as easily. The Sergeant Major of the Army, not a Sergeant Major in the Army, the Sergeant Major of the Army. He is the senior most enlisted person in the Army. Not to put too fine a point on it, he's a god in the Army.
What? Sergeant Major of the Army is a god in the Army? No. I mean, the thing is that, once again, there are plenty of, Army veterans who would probably come out, and people that have been in, spec ops and, even just Rangers, who would probably come out and who would talk about this, about the promotion boards that they go to, and how idiotic, absolutely idiotic that they go through. And to think that these sergeant majors learn how to egg suck. I'll just be frank with you. They learn how to play the game. It's like, yeah, there probably was a time when they were high-speed, low-drag folks, but eventually they learned to play the political game. So when I see the Sergeant Major of the Army, I'm not going to show his tweet. I'm not going to bother. But basically, when he says, "Oh, we have racial problems in the military, this and that," the thing is that once again, by the time you reach that Sergeant Major of the Army post, that's only like a 2 or 3 year gig at most, and then you can retire. You have to put that into perspective. This is the end of their career. They don't have to deal with all these different folk. They don't have to deal with all these different people around them. Put that into perspective. They don't have to put up with this ish for that long. So why is it that the Sergeant Major of the Army, did this? Come on. You got to read between the lines, man.
He sent out a few tweets, and they're basically the last video. It's incredibly similar. The only difference is, it took me like 9 minutes to get all of that out. He's an NCO, a non-commissioned officer. He's very direct. You can probably read all of his tweets in like 45 seconds, and it carries the exact same meaning. They're very concise. They say exactly what they mean. And that is what has caused some controversy. After his tweets in the video, very short video, because he's an NCO, it starts off by saying that the country and the Army is struggling with racial inequality. This is not a controversial statement on this channel. NCOs say exactly what they mean. So the far right is livid, because the struggle is racial.
Yeah, once again, the far right, it depends on what you mean by far right. You think that all MAGA pedes are extreme far right folks. In general, no, they're just old boomers that really don't give a hoot, in general. They just LARP, But once again, the Sergeant Major of the Army makes these statements, as I said, you can look through the list of people that are Sergeant Majors of the Army and how long were they in those positions. You'll find it's about a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn. It's been a while since I've looked at those details. But the thing is, they're not in those positions for that long. So they can make their statements and they don't have to be held accountable because they aren't going to make Army policy. They don't have anything to do with it. They can they can just say these things like, oh, well, there are these problems in the Army. All he has to say is, well, there are problems in the Army, but I'm going to be leaving in 6 months. So good luck with that. You know where to send the check. See you later. Bye. That's all they have to do. So you have to put that into perspective. So when the Sergeant Major of the Army makes his comment, he's not going to change anything. He doesn't have to be accountable fully for what he says. He can just say, well, I made my comment. And so if someone does try to find him for an interview, they can say, oh, well, of course I was against that. Oh, well, of course. You remember that tweet that I made? That video where it came out? So of course I was against that. Oh, well, of course I supported those things. And then, of course, that maybe just the end of it. But this is very much bootlicking here. This is a guy who's never served in the military, and yet he now tries to talk about NCOs of this as if he knows exactly what they were talking about, or understands the mentality of someone who's been in the military. And no.
Inequality. It's not with protesters. He has correctly identified the source of the problem, and he said it. Sometimes when you're talking to NCOs, what isn't said is just as important as what is. And then what really drove him over the edge is they think he was sending a third message as well. And I'll be honest, I heard the same thing. However, I would not presume to put words into the Sergeant Major of the Army's mouth. He also used listen. The reason this matters, you can ask the vets in the comment sections. If an NCO walks into a room and says, listen up, everybody stops. Doesn't matter what they were doing, they stop. Because there's more information that may change what they're doing at that exact moment. The fact that that term...
Once again, yeah, that may be true, but once again, the Sergeant Major of the Army just says, listen up, Captain, the company commander says we have to do this. So he says, listen up. That doesn't mean that he supports it. You see what I'm saying? It makes, once again, context. So when your squad leader walks in a room, your staff sergeant or your sergeant walks in a room and, he says, listen up. Lieutenant said, we're going to be doing this. That doesn't mean he automatically approves of what's going on, but he understands, hey, I follow what this guy has to say. I follow what my what my company commander or my platoon leader is going to say, or what the XO says or whoever says. You see what I'm saying? So he's not being very clear. Once again, someone that's been in the military can understand what that really means. Is that, just because the Sergeant Major of the Army says that, you think he fully believes it? No. He's following orders, period.
Was in his statement, the Joint Chiefs statements, and the overall theme of all of the statements is about listening. It's important, and I am reading it the same way as the far right. The difference is I don't think it's a bad idea. These are people of action. Listen is not what you would expect to hear from them. If
people of action, how long did it take for people of action is a matter of opinion. Yeah, some of them are people of action, of men of action. Others, not so much. Once again, it's easy for you to say, oh, well, the Sergeant Major of the Army, he's a man of action. It's a matter of opinion. How long would it take for reforms to happen in the United States Army? That's a matter of opinion. Yeah. So action, it's a very loose phrase.
they believed what was going on was a good idea. So again, I don't know that is what he was intending to convey. I heard it that way. A lot of other people heard it that way. But by what he said, he was sending a message to the country and a message to the Army. NCOs say exactly what they mean. So whether or not the country includes the president, that's for him.
Exactly what they mean. Well, as we said in the example, do you think that they honestly mean those things? It's a matter of opinion.
No, I don't know. Now, because of all of this, it has, of course, riled people up, and the idea of the far right disavowing, quote, soldiers who have taken a knee with protesters has arisen. I don't know what disavowing means, but what I do know is that under normal circumstances, when we're not all staying at home, I travel a great deal. I go to Columbus, Phoenix City, Fort Walton, Tampa, Clarksville, Dothan.
I'm just going to let this quote speak for itself. Democracy is a form of the state. It represents, on one hand, the organized, systematic use of force against persons, but, on the other hand, it signifies the formal recognition of equality of citizens, the right of all to determine the structure of and to administer the state. This, in turn, results in the fact that at a certain stage of development of democracy, it first welds together the class that wages a revolutionary struggle against capitalism, the proletariat, and enables it to crush, smash to atoms, wipe off the face of the earth, the bourgeois, even the Republican bourgeois, state machine, the standing army, the police, and the bureaucracy, and to substitute them for a more democratic state machine, but a state machine nonetheless in the shape of armed workers who proceed to form a militia involving the entire population. That's State and Revolution, V.I. Lenin. Now, this guy, he is afraid to call himself an anarchist, but he is afraid to use words like that. Okay, let's finish this up.
Then, if you ever see me in the bar, and you have a photo on your phone of you in uniform taking a knee with protesters, the next round's on me.
That is ridiculous. This guy calls himself an anarchist. Actually, he doesn't even like to call himself an anarchist, but he identifies roughly as an anarchist, and yet he is openly, yeah. This goes to show that people like Bo with the Fifth Column are just, you know, what else can you say about it? This is bootlicking activity. You're going to have a beer with a member of the military, a guy who, this is one of the problems that I have with him, is that he will of course talk about the military, this and that, and say how awful they have been, or whatever history, and he wastes his time talking about MAGAPEDs. He thinks that MAGAPEDs are somehow the majority of people out there, or thinks that the majority of the far right are influenced by Trump. The reality is that's not the case. That may be the case with boomers and some, Zoomers and millennials, but for the most part, that is not the case. This guy is just openly being a bootlicker and trying to be someone who says, oh, come on, folks, we can still trust the military here. Yeah. I'd rather much trust someone like Comrade Hakeem, who says the military is never going to be your friend. The military, the police are never going to be your allies in struggle. Hold on. Give me one moment, folks. Okay, here we go. Finish it up.
Disavow, because we support the troops, unless we can't use them for our own political agenda, I guess.
That's exactly what you're doing, though.
It's important to keep an eye on these statements, because these are people who realistically could raise a division of volunteers with a tweet. All of
Press exit out on that.
the generals who have spoken out, all the brass who have spoken out, all the influential people within the military community who have spoken out, they're all on the same side. They're all very clear that they think that this is a bad idea. It's worth noting. It's worth paying attention to. Anyway, it's just a thought. You have a good night.
All right, whatever, bro. Okay, so as we see here, this is a guy who, whoops, sorry. There. Okay, so this is a guy who I have said before will talk all about these types of, about progressivism and, anti-racism and all this, and yet he will still support the military. Even Lenin, way back when, said, hey, we're going to smash the police and military into atoms. And yet, he'd be willing to have a beer with someone, with a member of the National Guard or whoever, who literally went on one knee in front of protesters. That's bootlicking. It is bootlicking, pure and simple. And so there will be a separation between people like this and more legitimate leftists, And let me finish off with this here, which is kind of going extra long here. But, when Keith Woods in his more recent video, he's like, we shouldn't be mad at the left. They're going to do what they're going to do. That we should be mad at the conservatives, people like Matt Walsh, who are now trying to make themselves into, at least boomer waffing by saying, oh, well, white people were killed by cops too. He's trying to gain some sort of clout and trying to show that he's still, trying to keep his credibility up, and trying to regain some that he's lost by saying, oh, well, we all like to walk on construction sites, this and that. He's trying to, and the thing is that these are people not to be trusted. These are people that will ultimately bend to the system. They'll ultimately say, well, we still, and all I can do is they're going to do the meme of That's all they can do. And people like Bo the Fifth Column, I would say, are on the same spectrum in a lot of ways. They are on the spectrum of, well, we can change some things, but he's very wishy-washy. Ultimately, he says, well, we don't need a revolution, but So it's good to put into context, folks. This is what these folks are about. They are not here for you. No matter how you feel about what's going on, they're ultimately going to bend the knee. And he'll even buy the first round if you bend the knee. That should be a sign. And with that, I hope y'all have a good day. See you later, folks. Bye-bye.